All right, Chapter 6, How Cells Harvest Chemical Energy. We're going to talk here mostly about cellular respiration. Talk a little bit about photosynthesis and where the energy ultimately comes from, but we're mostly concerned with cellular respiration. Don't want you to confuse that with an organism's respiration. That is, in fact, how we get oxygen to our cells. But when we talk about cellular respiration, we're going to be concentrating inside the cells to see how the oxygen and the sugar are used to make energy. So ultimately, yes, we breathe, we get our oxygen that way, but cellular respiration is going to be inside of the cells. All right, how is a marathon runner different from a sprinter? Believe it or not, this is directly related to cellular respiration. There are two different types of muscle fibers in people, in birds, animals, and the two different types of muscle fibers, they use oxygen differently. There's a slow twitch muscle fiber, which is aerobic. We call aerobic. Aerobic means it needs oxygen. And there's the fast twitch one, which is something called anaerobic, without oxygen. So if you think of an aerobic workout, you're going to be working out slowly, breathing deeply, oxygenating your blood. Anaerobic is fast, but you don't need oxygen. So you have the, like I said, the aerobic slow twitch fibers and the anaerobic fast twitch fibers. The aerobic ones are going to have more mitochondria because that's where we're going to use the oxygen. The anaerobic ones will have less. The aerobic ones are also going to have more of something called myoglobin. And in birds, this is what turns the meat, the dark meat color. If you eat the thighs or the leg, it's a dark color. The breast of a chicken, I'm thinking of a chicken, is white meat. And that's because it doesn't have so much of this myoglobin in it. It works anaerobically. So when we talk about cellular respiration, we're going to talk about the aerobic. We're going to use oxygen. So I said we're not going to concentrate on photosynthesis here, but it does need a mention because photosynthesis and cellular respirations are the opposites of each other. One's going to take energy from the sun and it's going to produce sugar, and the other one's going to use sugar to get energy out. So they're pretty much opposites of each other. Cellular respiration makes ATP. Now, every time we say ATP, you think energy. That is the basic unit of energy. Adenosine triphosphate, that's energy. And cellular respiration consumes oxygen, where photosynthesis releases oxygen. So during the oxidation process of glucose to carbon dioxide, that's what we breathe out. Photosynthesis, here's a nice diagram of it, is, like I said, it's the opposite, to produce glucose and oxygen from carbon dioxide and water. What a great reaction. So we have here, you have energy coming into the equation here from the sun. Now, all energy we talk about in biology ultimately comes from the sun. And then you're going to have photosynthesis take place. It's going to take carbon dioxide and water, and it's going to make sugar. Yum, glucose is sugar, all right? So it's going to make sugar and oxygen. Can't get better than that. Then we breathe in the oxygen, eat the sugar, yum, 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 take it to our mitochondria. We get energy out, and we release from that water and carbon dioxide. Okay, ultimately, yes, breathing supplies oxygen to our cells, and it removes the carbon dioxide. So it is, we need to talk about it when we talk about cellular respiration, but remember, this is not going on at the cellular level. This is how an organism ultimately gets oxygen to its cells. When we talk about cellular respiration, we're going to talk about what happens inside of the cells. So for humans, obviously, we're going to breathe in oxygen. We're going to get that to our bloodstream. It's going to take it to all the cells of our body. And when it's there, it's going to remove our waste product, which is carbon dioxide, from cellular respiration. And it's going to bring that to our lungs so we can exhale that out as a waste product. All right, cellular respiration banks energy in ATP molecules. Like I said, ATP is your basic unit of energy. Where do we get our energy from? We're usually talking sugar, glucose, basic unit of sugar, right? Then we need oxygen, and from that, go in this direction, we're going to breathe out carbon dioxide, we're going to release water, and we're going to get energy, which is what we need. That's why we eat the sugar. So we can't make our own energy, we need to eat it. So that's what cellular respiration does. All right, human uses ATP for everything, including just plain thinking. Actually requires ATP. You don't want to waste your ATP running around. You want to focus it and use it. So if I say don't waste your energy, I can say don't waste your ATP. This chart just gives you an idea of basic calories consumed during different activities. If you can see, it's in kilocalories. That's the scientific unit for a basic calorie. When you read calorie on the side of a box, it's really a kilocalorie. They just capitalize the C. You can see bicycling is very aerobic, uses a lot of energy, dancing, running, and then sleeping or lying still is going to be their base unit. All right, cells tap energy from electrons by falling from organic fuels to oxygen. Why is oxygen so important? Well, because it's a fabulous oxidizer. It will take electrons. It is the best electron acceptor out there. So if you remember way back, I said that we needed oxygen for advanced, animals to develop. One reason oxygen's so important is because it is so good at taking these electrons and therefore releasing energy and making ATP. Every time electrons lose potential energy, we can capture that energy in organic compounds, and ultimately they will end up going to oxygen. Okay, cellular respiration uses something called an oxidation reduction or a redox reaction. And what that means is, remember I said oxygen was such a good acceptor of electrons. It was fabulous, and it takes them in the form of hydrogen atoms. So here you have your sugar. It is going to get oxidized. What's it going to be oxidized by? The best oxidizer out there, oxygen. Okay, oxygen won't oxidize itself. It's going to oxidize the sugar. That means that oxygen becomes reduced. It accepts electrons. And I always think of reduced in it accepts a negative or two negatives. So it's reducing its charge. All right, so the sugar becomes oxidized by oxygen, and the oxygen becomes reduced. All right, dehydrogenase is the enzyme that removes the electrons, again, in the form of hydrogen atoms, and it transfers them to something called NAD. So you can see here, you have these two hydrogen atoms right here. The dehydrogenase, it's an oxidation reaction, is going to take them, put them over here, all right, that's our oxidation. At the exact same time, you're having a reduction reaction. These two hydrogen atoms come over here, and they bind to something called NAD, and they form NADH. And NADH is an electron carrier, and it will take them off to be used in the electron transport chain. So NADH passes electrons to something called an electron transport chain. This is actually where we're going to get most of our ATP, as these electrons fall from one carrier to another, and they end up with the best electron acceptor out there, oxygen. And each time this happens, energy is released in small quantities. So we start here. We have our NADH. It's going to give off its two electrons. It then becomes plain old NAD, and it gets recycled. It can go do that somewhere else over here. As it goes down the electron transport chain, each step, it's going to give off energy at each step, finally ending at oxygen and forming water. All right, cellular respiration occurs in three main stages. The first one's going to be glycolysis. You're just going to get a small amount of ATP, and you're going to get something called pyruvate, which then goes on to the next two stages. The next two stages are going to be the citric acid cycle and something called oxidative phosphorylation, which is just the electron transport chain. Sometimes it is abbreviated ETC. So those are going to be your three main stages: glycolysis in the cytoplasm, citric acid, and electron transport occur in the mitochondria. Okay, glycolysis. This occurs in the cytoplasm. So when we talked about those fast twitch muscles that didn't have a lot of mitochondria, they can still do some cellular respiration in the cytoplasm. It's not as efficient, it's not as good as making ATP, but it does make some. And what it does is it breaks down glucose, which is a 6-carbon sugar, into something called pyruvate, which is a 3-carbon sugar. It makes 2 pyruvates, and it makes a small amount of ATP in the process. The citric acid cycle takes place in the mitochondria, and it completes the breakdown of glucose, and again, it's going to produce a small amount of ATP. So you say, well, why is it so important? We're getting a small amount of ATP because it supplies the third stage with the electrons. Remember, the NAD is going to take the electrons, and you're going to get something called FAD, which turns into FADH. Those are going to take the electrons to the electron transport chain, where we are going to get the vast majority of our ATP made. Oxidative phosphorylation, big term for the electron transport chain. This, again, occurs in the mitochondria. This is the one that uses the energy by having the electrons fall down all the way down to oxygen. Every time they fall, they release a small amount of energy, and that energy is captured using an enzyme called ATP synthase, and it will produce ATP. This is where we get our big bang for our buck. We're going to get the most ATP in the electron transport chain. All right, so here's your overview. You have outside in the cytoplasm, you have your glycolysis. It's making that 3-carbon molecule pyruvate, which will move into the mitochondria. The rest of this is going to happen in the mitochondria. We get a small amount of ATP from glycolysis, but what we really get and we really like is this NADH. It's high energy electrons carried by NADH. These can go to the electron transport chain. The pyruvate is going to get broken down in the citric acid cycle. It's going to release a small amount of ATP. It's also going to release some NADH. This will also go to the electron transport chain. Glycolysis harvests the chemical energy by oxidating glucose to pyruvate. So in glycolysis, we have a 6-carbon glucose right here. You got 6 carbons. Little balls represent the carbons. And we're going to break that essentially in half, and we're going to get 2 3-carbon pyruvates. We're going to get a small amount of ATP. How small? Just 2. We're going to get a small amount of NADH, but remember, this can make a lot of ATP. This is our big bang for our buck. These are the high energy electrons, and these are going to go off to the electron transport chain and be used to make ATP.